1. Good evening and welcome to our third episode of the Racing Line podcast. Good evening, gents. How are we?
Very good, mate.
Very
How are
good.
you?
Yeah, hi guys.
Good to hear. So tonight we're going to be reviewing the latest Formula One Grand Prix, the Turkish Grand Prix that took place last night out of Istanbul Park. Let's jump straight into it. It was a pretty lackluster race for the majority of it.
What a bore.
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. Just got a few points to summarize kind of what happened. I feel like it was the Carlos Sainz masterclass of passing for the majority of the race. Apart from that, there wasn't a whole lot going on. Charles Leclerc kind of showed why Ferrari had so much pace over the course of the race. Obviously he tried to stay out. It didn't work out, but Ferrari on a whole were pretty fast all weekend. Bottas obviously won, which isn't a surprise. Mercedes had the pace all weekend, and it seemed like Max was just controlling the race throughout, kind of a fairly risk-averse strategy, as long as he stayed ahead of Lewis. Hamilton made his way through the back of the top 10 fairly easily, but it became a little bit more difficult for him as he got to the front. He made some great moves on the outside of a few people with the extra downforce that he had. Perez did exactly what Red Bull have been looking for ever since Daniel Ricciardo left. And I think it's safe to say that if Verstappen wins by less than 4 points, he has some part to play in that championship. McLaren and Aston Martin were in limbo for the majority of the race, kind of weren't doing a whole lot. And I think, interestingly, Ocon made the top 10 by not pitting. But when looking at his tyres at the end of the race, it kind of vindicated Mercedes and their position to bring Hamilton in. And I think it just proves that they really couldn't afford to have him getting a puncture with only 6 rounds to go. So I think they were a little bit risk averse as well, and just thought they'd take their medicine and make sure that they got home. It leaves us with a 6-point lead to Verstappen in the Drivers' Championship. The battle for third that we were talking about in our last F1 installment between Ferrari and McLaren is down to 7.5 points, which is great to see. And with 6 rounds to go, it's all to play for. So it wasn't the most entertaining race by any stretch of the imagination. I think the rain and the fact that a dry line wasn't really developing kind of ruined the race a little bit. The fact that everyone was just kind of staying on the inter and no one could perform undercuts or things like that. But let's move into the surprises and disappointments of the race, and we'll start with you, Harry. What were your takeaways, mate?
I just want to mention the fact that Ferrari had the best team radio I've ever heard. Charles Leclerc radios through to the team, if I stay out, where am I going to end up? And they say, if you keep Bottas behind, you'll be P1. That epitomizes Ferrari for me. That is the best team radio ever. But my surprise,
straight to the point.
Oh, mate, it was like, thank you, thanks for that. Surprises. I was opposite to you, Anthony. I thought Mercedes could have kept Hamilton out. The data suggested that the Inters took 3 or 4 laps to get in the window, and if the Mercs wanted to change him, they should have brought him in earlier. They should have been more forceful with him. They went through a phase where it took them a while to get him heated, and then they were graining a bit, and then they came good. And I think they just brought him in way too late.
I've put something on our Facebook chat just for everyone to have a look at. Karun Chandok put a picture on his Twitter showing Hamilton's tyres, ones that they swapped out. Have a quick gaze, but if you look at them, they're actually really, really worn, and you can see the carcass starting to come through. So I think it was more just a precaution that Mercedes just did not want to lose any points in this race. Like, they knew they were going to be behind Max now, just damage limitation. Even I read something this afternoon, about Toto Wolff saying to win championships, you just need to cut your losses someday. So I think that was really what it was. But those tyres were pretty worn. Just to cut you in, sorry about that.
I agree.
I just think they should have brought him in earlier. Like, no doubt, they needed to change him. I just think
Yeah.
with the data that they got from Danny Rick, because he stopped, he was
Really
the first
early.
one to stop. His pace wasn't great for the first 3 or 4, and then he started catching the cars in front.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think they needed to bring him in a bit earlier, but Toto is right though. Like Max is the type that will do something silly in the next 6 races, so they still got a fair chunk of points here, which is good. Gasly's pace relative to Norris in that first stint, he was pulling out almost a second a lap on Norris there. That McLaren didn't really have that much pace throughout the whole weekend, really. We saw what happened with Daniel in quali, but this car doesn't seem to
Actually, didn't see Daniel in quality, to be honest with you, mate.
Yeah, you miss Q1, did you?
Yeah, I jump in at Q2 when the big boys start to play.
Yeah, don't even start me. I went to bed so angry on Saturday night. But yeah, this car doesn't seem to
Wasn't a happy
like
camper.
these type of tracks. Zandvoort was similar. They didn't perform very well at Zandvoort. And the AlphaTauri, like, it's not the fastest car, it's not the slowest car, it's just consistent. And Gasly's driving above where that car is, but even Tsunoda had a decent weekend. It's just able to perform consistently on every track. Disappointments, the race itself. The first 5 laps were great. Carlos did a really good job moving through the field. But other than that, not much happening. I don't know if you guys feel the same. I just thought after the races we've had recently, it was a bit of a damp squib. And I got a little bit of an issue with Michael Massey. I know he's a expat, but sort your team out, mate. How do you give Gasly a 5-second penalty for that incident at the first turn? It was clearly a racing incident. He was clearly squeezed in. I think it was by Charles. Gasly was in the middle, had nowhere to go. And yeah, Alonso made a big deal of it over the radio, and that's, they could play into FIA's thinking. But then Carlos bangs into Vettel unnecessarily as he was moving through the field and gets nothing.
He was ahead of Vettel, but by that stage.
But if you're going to do it, you've got to be consistent. And the other thing is, Gasly got 2 penalty points on his license, which I think is overkill. But they're just my surprises and disappointments. I don't know if you guys agree, but
I'm on Michael Massey. Clean up your act, mate.
I completely agree with what Harry's saying about the Gasly incident, though, because just watching it looked like a racing incident. It didn't look, like Gasly was being reckless or anything like that. I mean, he held his line. Alonso did come kind of out of his periphery, so to speak, and it just looked like an innocent racing incident. I didn't think that it was going to go, result in any kind of penalty. And then, what Harry's making a point with Sainz and Vettel, if anything, that deserved a penalty. And yeah, he may have been in front, but that looked more reckless than what happened with Gasly. I felt it was grossly unfair. I felt sorry for Gasly. Must make that point. Yeah.
The 2 penalty points is nuts to me. I don't understand why they give 2 penalty points for that incident on turn 1, lap 1 of the Grand Prix.
Yeah, like such crap conditions. I don't know what they expected.
Then you got Nando last week just totally cutting out turn 1 in Russia, and nothing happens. Like,
he decided to take a chunk out of Schumacher later on in the lap anyway.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he ended up getting
the
penalty,
same lap. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
But yeah. Anyway.
Interesting.
Joey, surprises?
My 2 surprises were the Red Bull boys, to be honest. I think Perez finally showed a lot of spark holding back Hamilton. I really think that was the most beautiful bit of racing I've seen in a long time, especially because when they got down to the bottom of the straight, I thought Hamilton was through. And then when it cut to the next shot, I was like, ain't no way he's going to hold this off. And he somehow picks up the car, pulled it out. And I was like, bravo, son. That is what we've been waiting to see from you for the last half year. But even Tsunoda holding back Hamilton at the start of the race, I thought was really, really good. And we all knew he was going to get past him eventually, but it was a good amount of time. And I think the two Red Bull boys really helped let Max build a bit of a buffer state between him and Hamilton. The one that I wasn't impressed with was was probably Pierre, because he literally just let Hamilton breeze on past like nothing. It's like he didn't even veer a bit to sort of show him a bit of side. Just let him straight through. Also, I think I was surprised to see how strong Bottas was in the race. He like, I haven't seen like that performance from Bottas for a long time. It was a picture perfect, boring performance, led from the get-go to the end, and it's a boring performance, but I was surprised to see how dominant he was. I don't know if Max was happy just to finish behind him, or they just couldn't keep up. But congrats, Bottas. I didn't think he'd win another race till the end of the year, and I'm happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah, well, his last one, I think it's his last one.
Yeah, well, I'm just happy to see that he's actually showing a bit of fight, even though he knows his future is sealed. You know what I mean? Like, you want to see, you want to see that. My disappointments, I think one disappointment was I was waiting for the track to dry. Like, you would have expected the track to dry out with that much circulation, just to throw a bit of spice into there. You know, maybe throw a bit of just a bit of a strategy change would have just spiced up the race, because it became very processional, and it never happened.
Seb tried.
Sorry,
Seb went on to the mediums at one point.
Seb tried, and Ricardo sort of, I think, was expecting it with his early pit stop, but I mean, those things never happen. And then, funny you bring up Seb. I've done a bit of research on the Seb today, because I was just thinking, I was looking at his performance. I'm like, yeah, he never had any spark, and I was like, how many times has he finished behind your best friend Stroll this year? And I went through all the races, and if he's actually finished only 5 races ahead of Stroll out of the 15 this year. And I was surprised to read that, because he's got more points than him. But even including his disqualification, it's only 5 out of 10. And Stroll's finished ahead of him 10 out of 15 times. And I think that's pretty alarming. I'm thinking to myself,
he's had a lot of bad luck this year, but
yeah, he has. But over 15 races, you would expect it to be a bit closer than 2/3. Like, if you didn't know that from when I said it, would you have been surprised to hear that?
no, not really. But I think I'll say this to you: he's had more points finishes, though, I think. And then if Stroll's, but he's ahead of him in the points, isn't he?
Yeah, because he's had better finishes. He's had 2 or 3 fifths, and Stroll, I think, his highest is maybe 7th, maybe 7th or 8th.
I don't know. If Stroll's coming 11th and he's coming 13th, I don't think that is that really important, to be honest.
That car's just not good.
But
he was actually one of my disappointments this week.
The strength of the car is not my argument. I'm saying, would you have expected 4-time champion Vettel to be finished behind Lance Moneybag Stroll 10 out of the 15 races this year? That's my argument.
I think it's been difficult for Seb to go from driving the best Red Bull, driving a decent Ferrari. Like we saw last year, he wasn't any good either.
Yeah,
he was spinning all over the place.
I don't think he's cooked.
It's not the same Seb. It's not the same Seb.
Like I think that since his fall from Red Bull, he has never had. He's never shown the consistency that he used to have ever. He had two half years at Ferrari where he was really on a roll, and I think the first year he had that crash at Germany that derailed his season. And since then, he has not looked the same. Since then,
I watched an interview a couple of weeks ago from Fernando. I think it was back in 2013, and he was talking about, I don't know if you guys have seen it, how Seb's championships, his 4 championships, will be looked down upon because he was in such a dominant car. He had no competition. And is that something we need to start talking about? Yeah.
Who said that? Alonso.
You could make the same argument for Hamilton.
You could say that Fernando was his biggest competition those years. Like those years that Seb won in the Red Bull, there was one year that we had 9 winners, different winners in the first 9 races or something.
I think he just meant the period of time. There
Maybe.
was that. Yeah, there was a couple of years in that 4-year stretch where there were other cars that were close, but yeah, Fernando, he said in this interview, I can't remember who it was with, that Seb's titles will be looked down upon in the future because that car was so dominant and he had no real competition. And Fernando was getting results in that Ferrari that he had no right to get. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, why he's also saying that, because Fernando, as much as I love him, loves to say things that make his exploits look even more amazing.
But if you look
at
that
car was so dominant and Fernando was racing the Ferrari, it just makes him look like he was.
But if you look at Fernando this year, you would say uncategorically that he is better than Ocon in that car consistently. Yes. But Ocon's got the win. You know what I mean? So the same argument I'm making with Seb is Seb's got the higher points tally, but on a like if from the eye test, you would say that I wouldn't say about Stroll, to be honest, but I'd say Alonso has raced better than Ocon for the whole year.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, just to interrupt you. I think that I see where you're coming from. Here's where I think it's interesting, though. If you take that Stroll versus Vettel scenario, and you put that same scenario in Red Bull, where there's an existing driver and a new driver this year, I think you would have a very similar statistic between Verstappen and Perez. And if you look at McLaren with DR and Lando, you're going to have a very similar statistic there as well. And even if you were to look at Ferrari, even though Sainz has done really well, I think it's going to be pretty similar as well.
But if you look at everyone you mentioned just then, DR has been spoken about as a world title contender before. You look at Sainz has been considered one of the best young talents many times before. Then you look at who was your other team?
Red Bull.
Red Bull with Checo. Checo, we know is a proven commodity. He totally wiped the floor with Stroll last year. Like these are all proven commodities.
Yeah, the point.
We're talking about Stroll. I'm sorry to interrupt. We're talking about Stroll, who people question if he deserves a position on this grid half the time.
Yeah, but the argument I'm making is that
compared to a 4-time world champion,
I'm just saying the statistic is favoring the person who's driven a very similar car the year before, because the cars haven't changed a whole lot. It's a very much an iteration from previous model of the car, more so than any season before that. And we're seeing that the driver that has stayed in the seat from the previous year is performing on average a lot better than the driver that is new to the team. So I don't know. I don't know. But if talking about the eye test as well, if you didn't tell me that stat, there's no way I would have said that Vettel hadn't performed better than Stroll, because when you look at when Aston Martin have had any decent positions this year or have performed and done anything of note, it hasn't been because Stroll's done anything. And if I had one negative that I took away from this race, was I kind of thought that this was Stroll's chance to actually remind us again that he's that he exists, that he's a good racer. It was a wet race. He kind of made it to Q3, which was good. But apart from that, he really didn't do a whole lot. I don't know. That was. I was actually looking forward to this race to see him prove me wrong, particularly after what we said about him last week.
I think this race was the weirdest wet race that we've had, because our better wet drivers, none of them really were able to move up,
except for Carlos.
But Carlos, but other than that, like you would have expected George to go up a bit more. You would have expected maybe Stroll to move up a bit more. You would have expected Hamilton to move up quicker than what he was. I mean, in the end of it, like even listening to Sonoda after the race, he said that little that race he had with Hamilton at the start totally shot his tires for the rest of the race. You know what I mean? Like it would have been weird to have a dry race, because that much wear on a wet track, that track must have a lot of wear problems.
I think also what happened was people were obviously waiting for the track to get drier, so they were managing their tires for so long in the expectation that the track would dry out, and then they could obviously just do that one pit stop and finish the race. And then obviously when it never dried out, I think what we ended up seeing was, you know, the better part of 30 to 35 laps of just people managing the tire till they got to that pit stop window. And then obviously once the track never dried out, it kind of, that's, I think, also what made the race so boring. Because if it was a fully wet race, or it started raining again and there was some kind of certainty as to what the future of the race would look like, I feel like people would have been less hesitant to use the tire. But obviously because they were expecting it to dry, and the fact that it never did dry kind of meant that everyone was just kind of holding station until they could get that into that pit stop window and then make something happen there. And then obviously the most interesting part of the race was actually when people started going onto the new tire, like Harry spoke about earlier, and the initial lack of performance because of the edges of the intermediate before they kind of disappeared as the tire wore down. That was actually what made the most interesting part of the race, and that's what you would normally get with the different levels of performance in tires. But for those 35 laps, when everyone kind of was just holding station, waiting for the dry line to come that never came, it kind of just killed 60% of the race. And that's pretty disappointing considering the track that we were racing at, and what really could have happened on such a good circuit for overtaking and heavy braking and things like that.
Which I think segues us into Michael and his love for this Turkish Istanbul city circuit.
Look, I just
Turkish delights.
I wasn't sure if Anthony just wanted to analyze the whole race by himself at this stage. Like, you may as well, mate. You've been speaking for the last 2 minutes, so just keep going. I mean, what's the point of even making these notes here now? But look, in all seriousness, I enjoyed the race in the sense that I didn't watch Hamilton win. I thought it was going to be a boring race, to be honest, after watching the first two qualifying sessions. But I just thought Hamilton was going to walk away with it. And then when I figured out that
to diff that it wasn't a boring race, to be honest.
when he ended up starting where he did, I thought, okay, this could get interesting here. But yes, like Harry said, I found the actual track. I haven't really, I'm not going to lie, I've never really watched a race there. Maybe I did back in the day, but I definitely couldn't remember it. And I just found the track really cool. That there's tons of overtaking areas in this track, particularly the last 2 or 3 corners, that little sequence of really tight corners before the main straight. Really cool. The first corner, I like how it swept right. It was like
Interlagos.
Yeah, very similar to Interlagos, even very similar to maybe not the hairpin element, but the start of Coda that we saw last week, like a sharpish left, followed by a long right. So yeah, it was pretty cool. Like I said, the turn 8 was just awesome. The shots they were showing on the TV were incredible. The pace that the cars were taking that section of the track, I just found that part of it really cool, particularly in the wet. So just from a viewership point of view, that was pretty cool. But look, in terms of my surprises, I was actually surprised that the race was relatively clean, considering the conditions. Obviously, it wasn't as wet as it could have been, but it was wet enough for the cars to move around a bit. And after the start of the race, when Alonso went spinning, I thought, here we go, this is going to be full of incidences, and we're going to have lead changes and whatnot. But yeah, very surprised that given those conditions, it was as clean as it ended up being. The point's already been made, but I initially thought Alonso was pretty unlucky to spin, but then when Gasly got given the penalty, I completely changed that opinion and felt really sorry for Gasly. I think that incident, though, could have been much worse than it was if Alonso's car had come back and hit Gasly on, after his car had made that revolution. You kind of saw the front of the car just miss Gasly. I think if they come back and hit him, it would have been chaos there. So it was actually quite lucky that he spun off the way he did with minimal damage. It wasn't really much of an issue. He got back onto the track and then ended up having a incident anyway later on that lap. So that was a surprise. Ferrari's race pace was surprising for me. We saw in the early race how quickly signed smooth through the field. He was on a mission there. And Leclerc was very consistent during the race. I think he kind of fluffed his line, so to speak, at the end there. And that funny radio communication was about as interesting the end of his race got. But I thought for a second that he could have won the race. But then, you know, obviously his wheels completely left him. So yeah, that was a little bit disappointing, I suppose. And that leads into my disappointments. And I think my biggest disappointment, given the way McLaren performed last week, was McLaren and Daniel Ricciardo in particular. I think he had a very ordinary qualifying, as we all know. Harry was not happy at all. You know, I remember flicking on qualifying on Saturday night to see Q2, and he was already out. So I didn't actually get to watch him qualify, but massively.
You turn it off after that, or you watch the rest of it?
No, I watched the rest of it, but it was disappointing because I actually really liked Daniel Ricciardo as opposed to Jack Miller. So
at least you like one of our natives, mate.
Yeah,
but in saying that though, and I know I've said it to you guys before the pod started, I feel, and Daniel should have pulled his finger out and got a better lap in, but I think McLaren's strategy of getting him out a few minutes early when that track evolution was so strong, his last flying lap, I think he put it up into 7th or 8th, you know, which is well in, you know, in the range for Q2. But then the track evolution, even the Williams,
I thought he put it in 9th.
I think he might have been 8th. But
there you go.
I think the track evolution was just so strong, and they got Lando out in the right time, which was frustrating. But you know, it allowed him to take the new engine, I guess. So sets him up for the rest of the year. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, so I think carrying on from that, another one of my disappointments. I know, Joe, you said that, and we did see Tsunoda put up a pretty good fight when Hamilton was moving through the pack. But I think when you saw Hamilton want to pass him, it actually looked way too easy. And the Gasly one was a joke. But even with Tsunoda, you could just see the moment where he just gives up and Hamilton makes the cleanest pass and is on his way. And that was the case with
I think
that was an awesome pass
because Hamilton was the only person. Hamilton was the only person who was actually into that break. That's a real hard braking zone because you're popping out to the right on the left-handed turn, and it really makes that right-hander that he's coming up to really hard to take. And he was the only person brave enough throughout the race to keep using that position.
I'm not taking anything away from the pass. The pass was incredible.
I don't think Tsunoda expected it.
Yeah, I just feel like the car
position.
Yeah, like I said, not taking anything away from the pass. I think the pass was incredible. You know, we're making the point before about, you know, Alonso commenting about Vettel's championships and him having a superior car. I think in that instance, apart from the superior racecraft, when it comes down to it, the car is so far ahead of the competition. And I just feel like you could see Hamilton catching him everywhere. And you know, he's the world champion. He's an awesome racer. But I just feel like into corners, out of corners, the braking, the Mercedes just has it all. So, when he does make the pass, it's no contest. It's not like, you know, there's a bit of a fight going on. It's just it's done really. And the only time we saw a little bit of give and go was with Perez. So, that was a little bit disappointing for me. My other big disappointment would be Hamilton's crew. I mean, last race we see them make the winning call, and they bring him in against his wishes almost, and he comes in, changes the tyre, and ends up winning the race. And it wasn't even a contest with the way Norris was at the end of the Russian race. But Hamilton did not want to come in. He made it very clear leading into that pit stop. And they made the point in commentary that he probably wasn't even aware it was going to come out where he came out. They bring him in and he was fuming. And I think the obvious biggest losers in this race is Hamilton, because he loses again. You know, he loses some really important ground to to Verstappen. So they were my main takes. Yeah.
That actually is kind of the polar opposite of what my negative or my takeaway from the race was. I think Mercedes are a well-oiled machine. I think they would have received some pretty valuable data after Bottas's pit stop to look at the state of his tyres, taking into consideration that Hamilton was pushing a hell of a lot harder than Bottas as well. And like Joseph said earlier, they made a decision because they thought that the tyre wasn't going to get to the end of the race. And then obviously, yes, Hamilton wanted to continue, but he didn't know how much longer those tyres had left in them, right? And if you looked at what happened to Leclerc just a few laps after that, his tyres dropped off even further from the situation where Hamilton's were in. So I think they made the right decision. I think they realized that if he kept charging the way he was charging, there was a good chance that he was going to get to the carcass of his tyre, and then he loses all the points that he's going to receive from that race. So my disappointment to me was how much this guy was, moaning about the decision after the race, man.
I honestly think he comes third. I honestly think he finishes in third if he doesn't pit.
He has been this team has given him 7 championships, man. They know what they're doing. Okay, they have given him a situation where for 7 out of how many has he won? 7 with them or 6?
6.
6 out of 7. He won 6 in 7 years with them, man. And every time
they won the championship, he didn't win.
Every time something goes against like what he's thinking, he is super vocal, and he's saying, the team told me to come in. I didn't agree with it, yada, yada, yada. Like, have some faith in the team that has given you so much. That was one thing that really annoyed me about Hamilton this week.
He doesn't even have faith in his tyres, mate. How's he going to have faith in the team?
Just listening to his interviews after the race, I just thought, mate, you've got to grow up, man, because there's obviously a reason why they did it. This team historically does not make mistakes. And every time something happens that isn't to his liking, like on a good race weekend,
prejudice get in the way here, mate.
On a good weekend, he's indecisive at the best of times, and he's always a worried, scared. Oh, how are my tyres going? How are my tyres going? The team makes a decision for him because they have some data that he doesn't have access to, and after the race, he's just, mate, poor form.
I think Mercedes thought it was going to start raining towards the end of the race. I genuinely believe that.
Did you look at the picture I put on the chat?
Well, that doesn't mean anything, man. Everyone's tyres were
graining. They're wets. They are wets, and they look like slicks.
Inters.
They're inters that look like slicks. I'm gonna say something now that I believe from the bottom of my heart. I know that us here, we don't.
From the very bottom of your heart.
From the lowest pits of my heart, the deepest, darkest recesses of my heart.
I think I know what's coming. Yeah, love for Lewis. That's what it is.
And I know that none of us here think that Lewis Hamilton is the great. Don't even get me started. I think that none of us here believe that Lewis Hamilton is the greatest racer of all time, and there's an argument for that. But I really believe that none of us here could argue that this Mercedes team is the greatest F1 team of all time. Sure. Without a doubt, there isn't no ifs or buts about that. Like categorically, they're better than Red Bull, who was probably the best team other than Ferrari, Schumacher's Ferrari. They're like probably your 3 best, and then after that, it doesn't matter. And we're listening to
all the Williams of the early 90s.
Yeah, but like I don't think any of them had it for like what Ferrari 5 years, Red Bull 4 years, these guys 8 years. We're listening to someone physically complain about the decisions his team's made, whereas last week he complained about it and then called them geniuses. Like after the race when he saw what happened, and then within 2 weeks later, we're hearing him complain about how they didn't bring him in and they let Ocon go for the whole race.
He's earned the right to do that.
How?
I think you've
earned. You don't win championships by yourself.
But I think when you win that often, and you can't sit here and say that he's never made the car better. We
No,
like to. We
no one's
like to
saying
see,
he's
like,
made the car better. We're
I
saying
like to do it
he
too.
can't see the grand plan of the whole race.
I think he
from his
can see the
from
grand plan. I think that's why he wins championships, though, because he does go along with it. Like last week, he could have done the same thing. He could have done the same thing last week.
he
but
did
he
the
didn't.
same thing.
No, he could have.
Michael,
I think you're talking absolute rubbish.
Michael.
No way.
I think you're talking absolute
No.
rubbish right now.
Sounds like you're talking about the Messiah.
Nah, look,
rumor
that's-
has it that you're growing dreads. That's what I'm taking from this.
I dislike Hamilton just as much as everyone else here,
Michael's
but I feel like
premiering
sometimes we
his
don't
Scottish
give him
kilt
enough credit.
next week.
We don't give him
Listen,
enough
mate,
credit.
I think
I'm not taking away from him. I'm just saying, if a team delivers you a victory last week that you didn't foresee coming yourself, why in 2 weeks' time, when they obviously you're upset, you think a podium's on the cards, but as Toto Wolff said yesterday, I don't think it was Toto, I think it was Lewis's team engineer. You don't win, you don't win championships by rolling the dice. You win championships by taking the best case scenario at the end of the year. I mean, if his tire had blown and he lost all his points, there goes Max with a 15-point lead.
I still think he finishes third if he doesn't pit.
I think you're talking absolute rubbish.
His pace before the pit stop was better than after the pit stop. So I don't know what.
Yeah, because
what you're saying.
Harry's explained that we're not disputing the pace. We're disputing the actual life in his tires.
Well,
you know that when a tire wears out,
Ah.
I'm gonna explain something to you. When a tire wears out, it pops. Do you understand that?
I know how it works, Joe. Button makes the point in commentary saying that Lewis is driving the car and he'd be the best gauge of
You
the
can't
feel
listen
at
to
that
the
point.
biased British
I
commentators.
think there's merit in that, considering Button is a world champion and he would know what he's talking about. Probably
He doesn't,
more
because
than you.
all the British commentators are biased. They love Lewis.
So
They
riddle me
can't
that.
see through the smoke
Riddle me that.
screen.
Lando was the driver in the car last week and he wanted to stay out. It wasn't the right decision.
Yeah, but
Literally
Lando
last week.
Lando was in a 6-time
Exactly.
world champion.
Oh, look,
Someone with
I'll give
experience.
Lewis something. You can't compare Lando making a decision to a 7-time world
No,
champion.
you
mate.
can't. You can't. You can't.
Poor analogy there, Anth. Up your game.
But you can't draw analogies to the Mercedes team making decisions for you compared to the
I didn't
McLaren
make any
team
analogy.
either.
I'm speaking facts here, boys. Cold hard facts.
Facts.
I think you're talking facts out of your ass.
I agree. He's making like
It's the eye. It's Joey's eye test that I'm going off here. So I'm
He's
just glad
playing devil
rapid.
advocate.
Yeah, it's
playing-
look, someone has to.
You got to stand up for his boy. So
Look, he's definitely not my boy, but I found the end of the race and indecision, like Anth said, there was the only consistent thing about that race was the weather, and the weather was just so I feel like it was so tricky. Teams were so indecisive, and it just wasn't wet enough to go on to wets, and it just wasn't dry enough to change from the inter. So that was fascinating, at least because the race wasn't.
After this pod, can you put up that picture of the tires on our socials just so everyone can see the state of those tires?
yeah, no, and I'll put up a poll. Who's right?
I think just to finish this section, man, like Michael's talking about Lewis Hamilton, like he's been driving this car off its wheels for 7 years, man. I feel like if William Wallace was driving in a kilt, that Mercedes, he'd probably get a few championships as well.
How long have
How
long has that been in your head? Just wanting to say that for the last 10 minutes. Oh, William Wallace would have killed this guy. Why don't you just pontificate to the end of this pod like you do for the start? Oh, I'm going to be on for 2 or 3 minutes just quickly talking about the race, boys. 20 minutes later, after the whole race has been analysed, he finally throws to one of us to give us our disappointments. Goodness, I don't even know why I bother showing up. Joseph's explaining to me how tyres work.
Mate, it's always good to have an amateur opinion in the podcast.
Just educating our listeners, Mikey B. Just educating our listeners.
I understand. I'm happy to sit here and take my medicine. I just like you said, someone's got to be the devil's advocate sometimes.
I agree. It's good. It's always good as well. So, hey, throwing back to you. Interesting news in Formula One this week regarding Red Bull powertrains and obviously the collaboration with Honda and what that means for Formula One.
Yeah, so Honda came out earlier this week to confirm that their arrangement with Red Bull for next year, Honda will be consultants to Red Bull powertrains. So Honda's kind of still going to have their foot in the door, and as Honda does, may flitter in and out of the sport over the next 10 years or so. But
the greatest flitterers
oh man,
always leave them when their cars get good.
Braun GP, love it. So more info is coming out about the 2026 engine regs. It's looking like VW, Volkswagen Group are going to have both Porsche and Audi. That's the rumors in Formula One. And the rumors are that VW are going to invest in Red Bull powertrains and brand it as VW Group powertrains. So with the new Concord agreement that came out last year, what the teams did was ensure that prize money, etc., was evenly spread instead of 70% going to Ferrari, then everyone else getting the scraps. It's also to help ensure existing teams up until 26, like Haas, who was, at the end of last year, I don't think he was that keen on continuing for that until this agreement was reached. Can we just
stop and think about Ferrari for a second and how much money they get and they still can't get their stuff together?
I love Ferrari for that reason. I absolutely love Ferrari because this sport wouldn't be the same without them.
All that money to produce a fuel flow irregularity.
Yep.
And let's put it this way: if they had danced around the rules and beat Mercedes, we'd be praising them if we wouldn't know how good they were. And you see how much they've invested in that little that engine roundabout, and then they've got it taken away from them. They've been nowhere.
You know what else I love about Ferrari at the moment? Mattia Binotto. He really is Wes Wally. He's not even turning up to the races anymore.
Bring back the Mclaren. That's all I say.
Well, he's there now. He's just in charge.
Could I touch on just quickly what you're saying about those Honda power units today? So I was just doing a bit of reading on my lunch break, and apparently that power unit was meant to be introduced next year. That was the plan for the last couple of years until Honda made the decision to leave. And Red Bull and Honda made a plan to bring it forward to halfway through this year. So they have half a year to test it with this new MGU they've brought in, because if they brought it in at the start of next year, they wouldn't have had the full Honda expertise to work out any kinks with that MGU. So that's the reason why that's come in half a year early, which I thought was, number one, interesting, but also good on Honda for actually, actually spending some more money to speed up that process to get it in the car, so they could actually test it before they put it in the hands of Red Bull, which I thought was interesting. I didn't know that they'd put that MGU in the Toro Rossos as well beforehand to get more testing on it as well. And apparently it's the MGU there's a 5 kilo play on how heavy it can be. So I think it's actually, I can't remember how heavy it's supposed to be, but they're saying that this one could be as much as 5 kilos lighter than the old one, because the one that they were running till previously was the same one that they had in the McLaren all those years ago. So this is like their first real big MGU battery update. So I thought that was actually interesting as well. So continue, but
that
that's just a bit of context.
That kind of leads me into what I was. So obviously they agreed the Concord agreement, and the teams all agreed that any new entrants needed to pay $300 million to enter, which would be $600 million for VW Group if they were entering 2 teams, plus all the tech required for the MGU-H, which is the heat recovery system, which is apparently the most expensive component in the power unit to produce. So from 2026, apparently what they want to do is get rid of the MGU-H and concentrate on the MGU-K. And currently it gives the drivers an extra 110 kilowatts, the MGU-K, and they want to up that because they're getting rid of the MGU-H to around 350 of kilowatts of output.
So what's the MGU-K? Is that MGU kinetic? Is that for like the flywheel and stuff like that? Okay.
Yeah. It's all the kinetic energy being reused. Yeah. Now, what this could mean is it'll be more attractive to prospective teams coming into F1 to not have to develop an MGU-H. And what I'm hearing is F1 wants 12 teams on the grid moving forward, 24 cars, 4 more seats, obviously more commercially viable. So I guess my question is, what do you boys think of VW coming into F1, even though the rumors have been around for years, and essentially running 2 teams and being a an engine supplier to Red Bull if they do take over Red Bull powertrains. What does this mean for Formula One and for VW Group, considering they've dedicated so much of their car business to electric, and obviously Formula One's not moving electric. So
Well, I really think that Formula One being the way that Formula One have grown their hybrid is other than Le Mans racing, like the Le Mans hybrid cars, the prototypes has been the you've seen the biggest advancements there, and you would expect it with the money that's being spent. The one thing that I find interesting with what you're saying about VW Group is who are the teams they want to bring in. They want Audi and who? Audi and Porsche.
Yep.
The interesting thing would be you look at Ferrari and Sauber, how they've got an agreement with that sort of feeder program. You look at Red Bull Toro Rosso feeder program, but there's one big team. And then you look at this Audi Porsche scenario. They're both massive OEMs by themselves. So would they be running a feeder kind of system, or would they both be pushed? Would they be pushing both of them to be sort of their flagship? If you know what I'm saying. Like, even you look at the news this week that Andretti wants to get into Formula One, and I would think myself that if Andretti wants to come in, he said that with the cost of running a team to be cheaper, making alliances, I think that he would fit like a glove for a for a McLaren partnership with his relationship with Zach Brown. Like you would see that as a feeder for McLaren, which don't have a feeder, but with this whole Volkswagen Group pushing two flagships, it'd be a really interesting dynamic. That's what I would think personally.
I think it's going to be slightly different personally. So I think with Red Bull developing their own powertrains, I think by the time we get to 2026 and the whole transition of Honda engineers, moving over to Red Bull over the next 2 years, by the time they get to 2026, I think Red Bull isn't going to want to go back to working with an engine supplier. And if they have success with the Red Bull powertrains project, I can see that continuing, particularly as the engine gets simpler and as they start developing their own idea and IP for their engine. So even though Volkswagen's coming in and there's talk that they've had connection in the past with, the F3 team that they used to have, and obviously being powered by Volkswagen, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily going to happen. The second thing I would think, even though there's the potential for Audi and Porsche to both join Formula One, I think history shows that they've competed in the same championships multiple times in the past. Recent history would show they've done it in WEC and also in Formula E, and they've had very independent
and in GT racing.
And GT racing, they've had very independent programs, even though they're under the same cloud group. So I would think that would continue in Formula One. Even though they're owned by the VW Group, they have a very strong rivalry between those two companies, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them doing very different things. The other thing that we need to take into consideration is if the engine gets simpler and it becomes a little bit more like a WEC engine, there's already IP that Audi and Porsche have from their own programs that, even though it's not relevant, as it is today, they can take from. And there's obviously the whole article about 6 months ago of Porsche having a Formula One engine that's as recent as 2 years ago, as they kind of thought about what their program was going to move to once they decided to leave WEC. So I think that those two companies are ready to join Formula One, but I don't think that they will be in cahoots at all. I think that there's a very strong rivalry there, and it would be good for the sport to have, Porsche, Audi, and Mercedes all competing. And something else that is fairly interesting to consider with the whole Andretti scenario. It's obvious that BMW have left Formula E as a manufacturer as of this year. Andretti wants to come into Formula One. Formula One's become significantly more affordable. I can see them buying out Sauber, or buying a share in Sauber, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some kind of over the next couple of years. It wouldn't surprise me if BMW come back to Formula One, and it would make sense to come back with Sauber and Andretti, a company that they had a lot of success with in the past in Formula One with Sauber, and connections that they have, very real ties with currently with the whole Andretti Autosport team. So that would be a communion that actually makes sense from, just historical points of view and current points of view. So I actually think
that church, mate.
But I honestly think that those connections that have been built make a lot of sense in Formula One, and taking into consideration also that sports car racing and Formula One has made concerted efforts to become more affordable. I think we're going to see a lot of those manufacturers that have kind of gone into other things reassessing whether they want to join Formula One again as it gets simpler, and the fact that they've got till 2026 to develop an engine gives them all a lot of time to do that. And I think the fact that we're seeing Audi, Mercedes, BMW, probably Porsche in the next year or so.
Audi.
I did.
Audi, they're both from Germany. It's all the same.
Two takeaways I'm taking from what Anthony's saying before he talks till 10:10. German manufacturers never do anything in halves. You see that in every category of motorsport. They're always striving to be the best. And I will piggyback onto what Anthony's saying there. I think it would be awesome to see Audi, Porsche, maybe even BMW, who knows, but it would be awesome to see 4 German engine manufacturers going at it in F1. And the question that I have, and you guys might be better suited to answer this, is with F1 trying to become more affordable, does it change the face and landscape of F1 itself as a category, or does it still remain the elitist category that it is? I'm not saying that it would be diminished in any sense, but does it become a little bit more accessible to motorsport fans who might not like it because of how elite it has always been? That's a question that maybe you guys might want to talk about.
I think it's still going to be the top category.
You're using the word affordable really loosely right now, because we're still talking about like $150 million, caps, and like that's insane money still, whatever it is. But the bigger thing I'm thinking here is, like, this is a weird time for manufacturers, where we've got Formula One with a radical change, we've got prototype racing with another radical change, both trying to do the exact same thing, and we've got sort of manufacturers who have put their feelers out into both. Like, you've got Porsche and Audi have both said we're doing prototype racing, and they're both saying, and we might do Formula One. You've got Ferrari saying we're going to go do prototype racing. So they're all converging.
And Alpine.
And Alpine, that's right. So is it going to be that they're all going to do it, which I don't think they are. And to me personally, I don't really want to see Porsche in Formula One. I don't really have any. They've never been in there before. When I think of Porsche, I think Le Mans. And that's really a brand, something that they take really strongly in their brand.
Have Audi?
Porsche did a season with McLaren.
Yeah, but
as an engine supplier,
they've never done one season. That's nothing. Cosworth has done more seasons than Porsche. Then
same with Aston though. Aston only did one season before this year.
Yeah, but Aston isn't really Aston. Like, they're not building an engine for themselves. You know what I'm saying? So I think when we talk about new manufacturers coming in, I think there really is a game being played here and I really don't think that Volkswagen would want 2 of their manufacturers racing in. I think the money would be ridiculous for them. And the other thing is, too many manufacturers in Formula One never ends well, because they all can't win at the same time. Like, this, you can never have, like, if you look at Formula E, they had the most manufacturers ever in any sport at once, and then within 1 year, they all left, all of them. So
Formula E was a bit gimmicky though.
Yeah, it was gimmicky, but like 1 year they're saying, look how good this is. We've got all these teams coming in, and then within 1 year, and you saw some of them had success and some of them had no success. But
yeah, but I also
it's a real big juggle.
I think you got to be very careful with Formula E when you consider that at the time that all these teams are announcing that they're leaving, there's also news from the ACO, there's news from Formula One about plans to cut costs and to make racing more affordable.
I suppose if you can choose to go win Le Mans or the Monaco Grand Prix or the Berlin E-Prix, you're it's not a hard decision.
I think the other thing that we need to be smart about as well is, yes, there's a lot of manufacturers, not all of them are going to join, but you need to think that the money that these manufacturers have been putting into either Formula One or WEC far exceeds the amount of money that even Formula One's cost cap is going to be now. So, for example, you look at a team like Ferrari, who have got resources to, for R&D and things like that. I feel like the money that they're saving from Formula One, they're like, let's reinvest it and get some more exposure and let's go into WEC. The same thing we're seeing with Alpine, or Renault. I think we'll see a very similar thing with Aston Martin moving forward. There's already talks about doing that. So I think that because of the whole cost-cutting measures that these competitions are taking, but also the fact that there is some level of similarity and convergence between the engine and the electronic hybrid system that both competitions are employing now, is that there is some chance of taking some of the R&D from Formula One into the sports cars, and potentially even vice versa. So I think that manufacturers could do both and receive the benefits from more exposure, potentially more prize money, and then kind of cross-pollinate between their two teams.
Before I lose this train of thought, so there was a like a car show this week, and a big international car show, and Mercedes was showing off that was it called the Project One, that AMG One, that amazing Formula One hypercar. So piggyback what you're saying, do you think that because both championships have got quite a bit of alignment, that we could see, like, especially now that Formula One engines have become a lot more durable, that we could see like the use of componentry from each of them sort of merge into one, especially now that Formula One and prototypes have all gone down this downforce created underneath the car and leave the top for show kind of route? Is that what you're sort of
100%?
piggybacking?
I think it 100%, and I think it's similar to what the landscape of racing looked like in the late 80s and early 90s, where we had Formula One and GT1, where even though there were different categories, very different categories, there was still a lot of crossover that could take place. There were teams that were able to take an engine from a Formula One car, strap it into.
Was the BMW that won Le Mans, did that have the Formula One V10 in it?
I think that was before they joined
Formula One.
It might have been. They might have actually built the engine for Formula One and then not gone into it at the time. But there was Ferrari did it, McLaren did it with the McLaren team, and obviously the GT1 that they went and raced in Le Mans with as well. So I think that it's kind of coming back a little bit more to that era, and particularly when you see the convergence of the rules somewhat, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense that there would be some level of parity, but some level of sharing IP between a company, but between race teams, if they thought that there was some level of performance to be made from it.
What a time to be alive.
All I know is it's going to be old school rivalry, Britain versus Germany.
And it's going to be great for motorsport as a whole.
100%.
To see more manufacturers, to make it more affordable for them. The more brands that we see, the better it's going to be for all of us.
More merch we can buy.
Exactly
right.
When
was the last time F1 had more than 3 cars going for the championship?
2012. You had
was that Raikkonen?
You had Hamilton in a McLaren. You had Vettel in his Red Bull. You had Alonso in a Ferrari. You had Raikkonen hanging around there in his Lotus.
Weber was doing well.
We had 9 race winners in the first 9 races or something like that.
It was tight till
Too long. It's too long ago.
Mm.
It's too long ago.
It's actually crazy to think. I was thinking about this today. How long it has taken everybody to catch up on the head start Mercedes took on this last generation of hybrid engines, and
they still haven't caught up.
no, they haven't caught up. But like we're now seeing the fruits of this new engine just before we're going to leave it. You know what I mean? Like this has been, in terms of even just the midfield battles, like it's blurred the lines between midfield teams and back teams. Like you see Williams actually pushing into the top 10. The only team that has been abysmal this year has been Haas, and we know that they're not spending any money this year. So like it's taken how many years? 8 years for we finally seeing the fruits of this new, or not new anymore, 8-year-old hybrid engine era, and we're getting rid of them next year.
Mercedes
we're
had
changing the cars.
Mercedes had such a head start because they were able to tap into the electric truck market with their trucks. You know, a lot of the technology was already being used in their long range trucks. They were able to adapt it to fit the regs for Formula
But they
One.
also made the decision, because they weren't in the championship at the time, like in the hunt, to say we're not going to develop this car anymore. We're going to jump onto the next car. But then even still, like you look at how much their car still has changed and how they're just always one step ahead of the curve every year.
Yeah.
Also
German
making the most
engineering.
beautiful cars.
The
German
Germans.
engineering.
Das Auto.
That's
That's
a good way,
Alto is Volkswagen.
a good place
know.
to wrap it up, don't you reckon, Ed?
I think we'll leave it there, man. Thanks so much for jumping on. Thanks to all our listeners out there for spending the time to listen to us talk gibberish for an hour. It's good. If you've been watching on YouTube, please give the video a like. If you haven't subscribed, please, it takes a second to do so. And also, if you're listening on any other platform and you have any friends, people that might be like-minded who might be interested in the podcast, please give it a shout out. Please get them to like and subscribe. It will be greatly appreciated. Next week, we've got a slightly different podcast coming up. We have an interview with a young Australian driver who's gone overseas to try to make a career in Formula One. He's recently returned to Australia to race in S5000. That is Joey Mawson, who won the most recent championship. So please be prepared for that, and keep looking at our socials for any updates that might be coming up. Thanks so much, guys, and have a great night.
Vote on the tire wall poll that we're going to put up there. H is going to put it on the Instagram, and let's put Michael in his place.
That's it, mate.
I'm
Lewis
definitely in
Hamilton,
my
the
place.
Messiah.
I didn't need to be put in my place, but like if you want to do that, go ahead. Someone just has to toe the other line, so to speak.
All right,
guys.
Mikey.
We'll leave it there.
Thanks
Thanks a
guys.
lot. Have a great night.
Have a good night.